Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, hi, welcome. My name is Celeste and I like to talk about true crime. So if you've been here for a little while, you know that I changed my setup a lot. Who knows how many times. Anyways, we're gonna see how long this lasts. So if you follow me on TikTok, you know that I've done previously the Bloody Alphabet. I also have all of the series here as well. I am currently starting the Bloody Alphabet number 2. We are just now starting it. If you want to follow me on TikTok and watch those videos, you can follow me here. This is my TikTok name. You can also find it down in the description box below. I started with the letter A, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about this person because I watched a documentary on them and it's just so crazy what he did. Honestly, I feel like I say that every time, but serial killers, they are honestly insane. So, the person we are going to be talking about today is Rodney James Alcala. Rodney was born on August 23rd, 1943. He grew up and became a convicted rapist and serial killer. He was eventually sentenced to death in California in 2010 for at least 5 murders he committed. However, there could be many more. It's not really known, and we don't know if we will actually find out how many people he did kill. So growing up, he actually lived with his mother because his mother and father split up early on. His father disappeared out of the picture, and he eventually in 1960 enlisted in the army. He was released from the army in 1964, and he was diagnosed with a personality disorder after he had a mental breakdown in the army. From there, he went to school at UCLA, he graduated. He was known to have a genius level IQ. Rodney actually committed his first known crime in 1968 in Hollywood. There was an 8-year-old girl named Tally Shapiro. She was playing outside of a hotel in Hollywood because her family had I believe her family's house caught on fire, and so her and her family went to this Hollywood hotel, and that's where they were staying for like a few weeks. Well, Tally decided to go play outside right in front of the hotel, and as she was playing, this is when Rodney pulled up in his car, and he began talking to her, telling her like, oh, like I'm gonna take you to school, or he said something about like trying to get her in the car, like I'm gonna take you to school, or your parents know I'm picking you up, and she kept declining, saying no, I'm not allowed to get in the car with strangers. I'm not allowed to. And he's like, no, it's okay. I know your parents. And she kept declining. Finally, she was like, okay. So she got in the car and he drove off. He took her to his house, and this is when the police showed up. The reason the police showed up was because there was a man right across the street from this hotel in his car, and he watched the entire thing. He saw this little girl. She was very uncomfortable. He was watching the whole situation. He saw her eventually get in the car, and he just had this gut feeling that something was wrong. Thank God for this man, because he ended up following Rodney to his house, and this is when he saw the little girl go into his house, and he called the cops immediately. There was a cop nearby. He pulled up to Rodney's house. He began knocking on the door. Rodney would not answer. He finally came to the door, and he's like, you need to open the door. And Rodney was like, oh, I just got out of the shower. I don't have clothes on. Give me a second. He's like, no, open the door now. He wouldn't open the door, so the cop busted the door down, and Rodney ran. When the cop went into this apartment, as he entered the apartment, he found Tally laying on the floor in a pool of blood. She had actually been beaten with a steel bar. And with as much blood as there was, the cop actually thought that Tally had died. He checked her pulse, there was no pulse, and he was about to go after Rodney when he noticed the little girl like move. So instead of going after Rodney, he did call for backup. Instead of going after Rodney, He tried to save this little girl's life. He called an ambulance, everything. They took her to the hospital and she did live. It turned out Rodney was actually hiding in his apartment the entire time. Police came and searched and everything. They didn't find him. And as soon as they left, he went out the back door. So Tali Shapiro ended up living. Her and her family moved to Mexico and wanted nothing to do with this situation again. So Rodney was now on the run. He ended up going during this time to the East Coast. He ended up enrolling in New York University and studied photography and film. He got really interested in photography, and this is when he started pursuing it. He changed his name to John Berger so nobody knew who he was, and the police literally couldn't find him. During the summer months, he ended up getting a job at a New Hampshire arts camp for children, and he was a camp counselor. And again, he was still going by the name John Berger. Well, nobody knew that John Berger was actually Rodney Alcala. They had no idea he tried to murder a little girl or anything. They just thought this guy was, you know, a photography major, and this is what he did on his spare time. Two little kids from the camp actually went into town and ended up seeing a wanted poster for Rodney. And they put two and two together and realized John Berger is Rodney Alcala. So the two kids went to the camp and told the higher ups in the camp. This was in 1971. And Rodney ended up being extradited back to California to stand trial for the rape and attempted murder of Tali Shapiro. Like I said previously, Tali and her family moved to Mexico and they wanted nothing to do with this situation. They wanted to put it in the past and just forget about it because Tali had been through a lot. She almost died, and like, it makes sense. However, since they didn't want Tali to testify against Rodney, he was able to only be put in jail for 34 months. After serving just 34 months, he was actually released in 1974 on good behavior. Go figure. This would be a terrible idea, obviously, because he tried to murder a little girl. Well, just 2 months after being released, he would actually be arrested again. He was caught with a 13-year-old girl smoking marijuana on the side of a cliff, and luckily he did not hurt this little girl. They were just hanging out, but the police caught him and took him to jail because he was smoking marijuana. It was said that the 13-year-old little girl accused him of kidnapping her, but I also heard that he was just hanging out with her, so I'm not really sure what the story was, but all I know is that this little girl was okay, and thank God. So he ended up going to jail for this, and again, after just 2 years of being in jail and having good behavior, he was let out again. After getting out, he ended up getting a job in 1977 at the New York Times, and this is when the Hillside Strangler was actually killing people. And so what's interesting about that is that a lot of the victims of Rodney Alcala is that they think they didn't associate him as killing other people yet. They thought there was people dying and they assumed it was the Hillside Strangler. We would soon later find out that some of the victims they claimed were the Hillside Strangler were actually Rodney's victims, if that makes sense. During his free time, he actually would go down to like Huntington Beach and stuff like that when there was lots of people out, you know, rollerblading, hanging out with their friends, just trying to relax in the sun, enjoy the beach. He went up to very vulnerable young women and young boys and convinced them that he was a photographer and he wanted to get more pictures of them and just try and expand his portfolio is what he was basically telling them he was doing. However, this is how he would get his next victims. Robin Samsoe was a 12-year-old little girl from Huntington Beach. She was hanging out with her friend down at the beach, and this is when Rodney approached them. He explained to them that he was a photographer and he would love to take more pictures with him. Sorry, he would love to take more pictures of them, and if they want to take some here, and then we can go back to his place and take more photos in a professional setting. Well, Robin was actually very interested. However, her friend was getting really bad vibes from this guy, and she was like, no, Robin, this is a really bad idea. I don't think we should be going in this guy's car. We don't know him, like, no. So Robin was like, okay. She listened to her friend, and Robin and her friend went back to Robin's friend's house. Well, after Robin's friend's house, Robin was to ride her bike. I want to say she was riding her bike home or to ballet class, and the way it was set up, I want to say it was her friend's house, her house, and then ballet class was in the middle, I believe. So she was either going to ballet or home from her friend's house. She got on the bike to ride home, and she ended up disappearing. So that day, June 20th, 1979, Robin would actually take her bike from her friend's house and ride to home or ballet, wherever she was going. And she ended up disappearing somewhere between her friend's house and ballet class. She was never heard or seen again. A search ended up going on trying to find her. They could not find her until 12 days later. Her body was found in the foothills of California, and she had been killed. At this time, they did not know who had done this, or anything. They had no leads. They had no idea what happened to Robin. Robin's friend ended up mentioning the guy they met at the beach, the photographer who tried to get him in the car and take these pictures. Alcala was the prime suspect in Robin Samsoe's case. They eventually got him, and he went to trial for her murder. However, the case was overturned. So the reason the case was actually overturned was because the Supreme Court let the jury hear about Tali Shapiro's case and what Alcala did to her, and this was not allowed. Like, this is why the case was overturned, and they had a second trial. So 6 years later, he went to trial again for Robin Samsoe's murder. Again, he was sentenced to death, but yet again, the case was overturned. And the reason this time was because the police actually had this park ranger. This park ranger was the one who found Robin's body. And they said they hypnotized the park ranger to get more information out of him. Apparently this was not allowed, so the whole case, the trial, was overturned yet again. The third trial would take place in 2003. While they were preparing for this final trial in 2003, like years later, her mom at this point was like struggling. Can you imagine having this killer, knowing he killed your daughter, your 12-year-old daughter, and being sentenced to death, and then it being, you know, overturned so it doesn't count, doing it again, being overturned, and finally in 2003, the last trial was in 1986, and then again in 2003, you're finally having this last trial. Her mom was a disaster. I can only imagine having to wait this long just for justice for your daughter. That's insane. So this 2003 trial, they were getting ready for it, and they were getting ready to prosecute him for Robin Samsoe's murder. Well, during all of this time, you know, evidence and everything, they kept it, and technology was advancing. Luckily, they were able to find DNA from other cases and other, you know, victims and match it to Alcala's DNA. And this proved that he yet again killed other women and raped them. So at this point, it was not looking good for him. So there was actually 2 women who had been raped and murdered in Los Angeles that was actually able to be linked to Rodney. So there was 2 more women that were victims that he had killed. They eventually found this storage unit that belonged to Rodney, and within this storage unit, there was hundreds of photographs. So all those years he was being a photographer and taking pictures of all of these women and young men and everything, he would keep these as mementos and hide them in a storage unit so police never found them. There was multiple photographs leaked, and this actually helped investigators and families find out what happened to their missing loved ones. There was one case in particular where there was this girl. She was in her early 20s. She moved away from home. She was the oldest, I believe. And after she moved away from home, she had a boyfriend. Her family never heard from her again. Years later, down the line, they found out that there was a photograph of her in Rodney's storage unit, and it was posted, and one of her sister's sons, which would be her nephew, found this picture, showed his mom, and said, that looks like Aunt so-and-so, I forgot her name. And it turns out it was. Rodney had actually killed her. He took her out into the desert. They were riding motorcycles and everything, and that is when he killed her. That's why her family never heard from her, and for years it was a cold case until they found this storage unit. Also within the storage unit, they found earrings, and it turned out the earrings actually belonged to Robin Samsoe. So right there, they got their conviction, they got their guy, they knew he did it. They would also find multiple other victims that they believe the hillside strangler killed. Turns out that Rodney was the one who was the murderer in those cases as well. So when they were getting ready for that third trial, they ended up putting everything all together. So instead of just going to trial for Robin's case, they ended up pushing the trial back and collecting all this evidence that they've got from the storage unit to put multiple cases against him and to actually put him away. So this final trial would finally take place in 2009. During this trial, he ended up being convicted of killing all 5 of these women that they were able to link to him, including Robin Samsoe, and in 2010 he was sentenced to death. Right in the midst of him killing all of these women in 1978, he actually went on a dating show called The Dating Game and was on television. He used his real name and everything. He was able to get on, even though there was already Tali Shapiro's case. He was still able to get on, even what he did to Tali Shapiro, who's already out of jail and everything. He was able to go on this show. So the episode he was on, there was a girl, she was the bachelorette, and 3 men, including Rodney. The girl sat down and there was a wall in between her and the 3 men, so she could not see what these men looked like. Throughout the show, she would sit there and ask the guys separate questions, and based on their answers, at the end of the show, she would choose one of them to go on a date with. And at the end of the show, the winner was actually Rodney Alcala. And when you win, you get to go on a date with this person, and it turns out this girl had really weird vibes from Rodney, and so she declined going on a date with him. Thank God she did, because who knows where she would be now. Honestly, she could have been another one of his victims. At this time, Rodney is still alive, and he is currently awaiting his death sentence on death row at San Quentin State Prison. And that is the story of Rodney Alcala. After Rodney was actually sentenced to death in 2010, the police released about 210 photographs that were found in this storage unit to try and see if any of the family members of these people can recognize them and find out what actually happened to their loved ones. So there's multiple pictures out there of people that were still unidentified and could still be missing to this day. Alright guys, I will see you next time. If you want to stay up to date, like I said, on the Bloody Alphabet, go ahead and follow my TikTok. Let me know what you think of this whole setup. I'm honestly really enjoying it, so let me know your thoughts, because I do want to know what you guys think of it. But until next time, bye guys.